I still remember the first time I laid eyes on my wife. We were both in college, young, shy, and not entirely sure of ourselves. She was sitting alone on a bench near the library, reading a thick textbook with a frown that suggested she wasn't really enjoying the material. I was heading to a class I was already late for, but something about her expression drew me in. I changed direction and asked if I could sit next to her. She looked up at me, a bit startled, but the corners of her mouth quirked into the smallest of smiles. From that moment, it felt like a little spark had jumped between us. We didn't say much, just exchanged a few words, but it was enough to break the ice. A few weeks later, I mustered the courage to ask her out for coffee. Neither of us drank much coffee back then. We were more hot chocolate or iced tea types. But that's how our first conversation took off. We bonded over our shared awkwardness and discovered we both had trouble making friends. Over time, that sense of being two quiet, introverted people in a loud, chaotic world brought us closer. We confided in each other about things neither of us ever told anyone else. She became my best friend, and I realized that I didn't want anyone else by my side. She felt the same. We built our friendship first, strong and steady, before we ever even talked about being in a romantic relationship. I think that foundation has always helped us navigate life's twists and turns. When someone is your closest confidant, you assume you can make it through anything together. Years later, we got married. It was a modest ceremony, just close family and a few friends. I still remember looking at her across the altar, thinking to myself how fortunate I was to have found someone who understood me so well. Our families always joked that we were attached at the hip, which wasn't far from the truth. We enjoyed each other's company so much that we rarely felt the need to seek out large groups of friends. She tried to push me a little out of my comfort zone sometimes, encouraging me to talk to neighbors or coworkers, but she never forced me to be anything I'm not. Likewise, I respected her own introverted tendencies. There was a lovely balance in that, a mutual acceptance that felt special and rare. Fast forward to the present, and things have changed in a way I never saw coming. She recently got a new job. At first, we were excited about this new opportunity because it came with better hours, better pay, and a chance to meet a different set of colleagues. Given that we both struggled to make friends, I was thrilled to hear her talking about the people she worked with. She'd come home with anecdotes about her day, sometimes complaining about difficult customers or praising a kind manager. She mentioned a few names in passing, men and women both, but nothing ever struck me as unusual or concerning. Then, one night, I happened to see our phone bill. We had a texting plan that we never even came close to exceeding, so I rarely checked the usage. But that month, we somehow blew past our limit. I was puzzled. Typically, we'd both text here and there, but never excessively. I was concerned there might have been a billing error or maybe some spam messages, so I dug into the details. That's when I noticed an enormous number of texts between her phone and a number I didn't recognize. It didn't take long for me to connect the dots. The area code suggested it was a local number, likely someone she knew in person. I approached her about it calmly. She looked uneasy the moment I brought up the phone bill. I asked her who she was texting so frequently. She hesitated, then said it was a guy from work. My reaction at first was confusion. She'd had male friends before, and I never minded. Neither of us is the jealous type in general, or so I believed. But when I asked why she was texting him so much, she got defensive. She confessed she was scared to tell me because she thought I'd be jealous. It struck me as odd, because I'd never given her a reason to think I'd be irrational about it. If it truly was an innocent friendship, why hide it? She reassured me they were just friends. She emphasized that he was someone she felt comfortable talking to, like a confidant. But something in her eyes told me there was more to the story. Friends from work is one thing. Texting all day and well into the night is another, especially if you're reluctant to mention it to your spouse. Once that seed of suspicion took root, it started growing. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was just me overthinking, but my gut feeling wouldn't go away. A few days later, I noticed she was lost in her phone at home more often than not. Typically, we'd spend our evenings cooking together, maybe watching a movie or chatting about our day. But now, it was like she had a constant companion right there on her phone, someone who was occupying all her attention. If I tried to initiate a conversation, she'd reply half heartedly, or sometimes she wouldn't reply at all, until she finished typing her text to him. It stung. I started to feel like an outsider in my own living room. When she did speak, it was usually about something new he had said, or a joke he had told her, or some aspect of his life that she found interesting. It became an almost daily pattern, me asking about her day, her enthusiastically telling me about him, and me feeling a swirling sense of discomfort in the pit of my stomach. I tried to be mature. I told her I was uncomfortable with how intense this friendship had become. She responded that she understood my feelings, but that I shouldn't worry. He was just a friend. She insisted she needed someone to talk to, that it was healthy for her to have someone outside of our marriage to confide in. On some level, I agree with that principle. Having friends beyond your spouse can be good. But this didn't feel like a normal friendship. They started meeting for lunch almost daily, going out for coffee on weekends, and exchanging pictures. Nothing provocative, she claimed, just snapshots of their day or random selfies. Still, I couldn't shake the idea that she was investing an enormous amount of emotional energy into him. The situation escalated when I learned that he was also married, and his wife wasn't comfortable with their constant texting either. Apparently, she had told him to stop texting my wife, to put some boundaries in place. Instead, they both figured out a workaround, texting through the game, hanging with friends, so that it wouldn't show up as a normal text thread on the phone bill. When my wife confessed this to me, my heart sank. I couldn't believe she was going along with something so blatantly disrespectful, not just to me, but to his wife as well. It felt deceitful and underhanded, like they both knew what they were doing was wrong, but refused to address it directly. I confronted my wife about it again, telling her how it made me feel. I told her that it was crossing a line, that I thought it was an emotional affair. She seemed irritated by the term emotional affair, insisting that there was nothing romantic going on. But the more we talked, the more I realized that it wasn't just about them hooking up physically. It was about the secrecy, the intimacy, and the emotional bond that seemed to overshadow our own connection. We had more fights in those couple of weeks than we'd had in years of marriage. I was torn between feeling jealous and feeling guilty for being jealous. After all, I didn't want to control her. That's never been the dynamic of our relationship. But I also felt justified in my discomfort. I tried to talk to a friend about it for advice, but our circle of friends is so intertwined with my wife's. I feared that if I confided in anyone close to us, they would immediately see her in a negative light. I didn't want to damage her reputation or have them think less of her, so I kept most of my thoughts bottled up. Every night felt like an internal tug of war. On one side, I wanted to trust my wife and respect her need for companionship. On the other, I felt like she was betraying the very bond we'd built over the years. Around this time, rumors began circulating at her workplace. Coworkers started speculating that she and this guy were having an affair. My wife came home upset one day, telling me how it had spread to nearly everyone in the store. She insisted it was just vicious gossip, that people always assume the worst. But I couldn't help but notice that gossip rarely catches fire unless there's at least some spark to feed it. When I calmly asked if this might be a sign that the friendship appeared too close to others, she snapped at me, saying that people love to talk and make stuff up. It was one of those moments where I felt the conversation slip away from reason and into defensiveness. Trying a different angle, I asked her, "If you're doing nothing wrong, then why wouldn't you tell your mom about what's going on?" Her silence spoke volumes. Finally, she admitted she wouldn't tell her mom because her mom would disapprove. I pressed further. "Do you think it's okay to continue something that makes me, your husband, this uncomfortable? Something that even his wife has asked him to stop?" She admitted it wasn't okay, but still refused to end the friendship. In her eyes, she wasn't crossing any lines, and by her logic, telling her to end the friendship would mean I was controlling her. I wasn't asking her to cut off all contact, though. I told her I just wanted her to dial it back to what you'd expect from a normal work friendship. A quick conversation in the break room, maybe an occasional group lunch or a casual text here and there. But no more nightly marathon phone calls, no more secrets, no more daily coffee dates that felt suspiciously like emotional rendezvous. She said she'd think about it. She even admitted that if the roles were reversed, she'd be furious if I had a close female friend who texted me good night every single day. Yet knowing she would hate it herself, didn't move her to change. It was as if she was compelled to continue, like she had found some emotional anchor in this man that she couldn't, or didn't want to, let go of. Things came to a head when I found myself at an emotional low point. We had tried to talk it out multiple times, but every discussion ended in frustration or tears. The distance between us grew more apparent. She'd walk into the house after work, phone in hand, a slight smile on her face if he had texted her something funny. Then she'd see me and that smile would fade. It hurt more than I can describe. I remember one evening, lying awake in bed, hearing her in the next room talking on the phone with him. She thought I was asleep. It went on for hours. When she finally tiptoed back into the bedroom, I pretended to be asleep because I couldn't bear to speak to her. I felt betrayed, yet also ashamed for feeling so powerless. The next day, I decided to write down my feelings. I poured out everything: my fears, my sense of betrayal, my desperation for us to reconnect. Writing seemed like the only way to express myself without getting into another shouting match. That's when I hatched the plan. I would leave her the letter, pack a small bag, and spend the night somewhere else, anywhere else. I just needed to shock her into realizing how serious I was. Before leaving, I also copied some comments I had found online, advice from people who'd gone through similar situations. I pasted a dozen or so of these into the letter, making sure she could see how others interpreted the situation. I didn't include usernames or personal details, but it was important to me that she read these outsider perspectives. I placed the letter on the kitchen table and walked out the door, heart hammering in my chest. I went to a modest hotel nearby, feeling an odd mix of anger, sadness, and guilty relief. It was the first night I'd spent away from home without my wife since we got married. The room felt lonely, the air stale, but I told myself I was doing the right thing, that I had to stand up for my mental well-being. I didn't want to threaten divorce or anything that extreme, because I wasn't prepared to leave her, but I needed a gesture that showed I wasn't okay with the status quo. About an hour after I checked in, my phone buzzed. I looked and saw it was her calling. I couldn't bring myself to pick up. I sat on the edge of that stiff hotel bed, staring at her name on the screen, feeling my heart twist in knots. Finally, I let it go to voicemail. She left a message, crying, a raw, unfiltered sob I'd rarely heard from her. In that voicemail, she said she was sorry, that she never wanted to hurt me, and that I should come home so we could talk. She said something else that caught my attention. She had gone to lunch with her friend that day, and they both realized they were developing deeper feelings for each other. They had mutually decided to end the friendship. When the voicemail ended, my head was spinning. Part of me felt a sense of grim validation. So there had been an emotional affair forming, whether she wanted to label it that or not, and part of me was overwhelmed by a flicker of hope. If they had realized it was going too far and decided to stop, maybe we could salvage our relationship. But I didn't immediately rush back. I needed some time to process everything, to let my own emotions settle. I walked around the room a bit, looked out the window at the dimly lit parking lot, and wondered if this was truly the end of that chapter. About 30 minutes later, I couldn't take it anymore. The image of her crying, so remorseful, tore at me, so I drove home. When I walked in, the letter was on the table where I had left it, but now it was crinkled, the edges damp with tears. She looked up at me from the couch. Her eyes were red, face blotchy from crying. I'd never seen her look so distraught. It's a strange thing to say, but in that moment, I realized just how much we mean to each other. Even in the midst of all this, she was my person, the one who knew me best, and the one I knew best. It was both comforting and agonizing. We talked for hours that night, more openly than we had in months. She admitted that, until that day, she had refused to believe there was anything more than friendship. But small feelings, fleeting thoughts, and emotional connections can sneak up on you. She said the other guy confessed he was developing feelings for her, but that he didn't want to pressure her into anything. The moment he said it out loud, she realized she felt the same. An attraction, an emotional draw she couldn't ignore. That frightened her. She knew it jeopardized our marriage. She insisted they hadn't done anything physical. No kissing, no touching, nothing of the sort. Just a growing emotional bond that crossed a line neither had fully acknowledged. Hearing her say it was like a punch to the gut, yet I found myself strangely relieved that they had decided to end it before it escalated further. If they had truly decided to back off, maybe there was still hope for us. As we continued talking, she read through the letter, rereading some parts, tears streaming down her face. She pointed to the comments from strangers I had copied, the ones saying that if two people are texting all day, going on these frequent lunches, and hiding things from their spouses, it's already an affair in emotional form. She apologized for putting me through the stress, for letting it get that far. She said she had been selfish, that she knew on some level it was hurting me, but felt an emotional thrill she didn't want to lose. That was a hard pill to swallow. My wife admitting she was chasing the rush of feeling understood or desired by someone else. But at least she was finally being honest. We cried together, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the same page again. I invited her to join me at the hotel, not because I wanted to run away from our home, but because I wanted to restart things on neutral ground, somewhere that didn't carry the ghosts of those late night phone calls and text messages. We checked in, and for a few moments we just sat together on the bed, holding hands, catching our breath. It felt like the calm after a violent storm. We decided to order some takeout, and while we waited, we soaked in the hot tub downstairs. It was both surreal and oddly reassuring. We hadn't been that close, literally and figuratively, in weeks. Later that night, back in the hotel room, we talked again for hours. I told her everything I'd been holding in, my anger, my jealousy, my hurt. I told her I worried I wasn't enough for her anymore. She looked at me with such sadness in her eyes and told me that I was still the most important person in her life. She said she just felt isolated at work, that she'd found someone who seemed to connect with her on a level she wasn't expecting. And once those daily texts and lunches started, it became a kind of habit, an emotional crutch she leaned on. She promised to earn back my trust, no matter how long it took. The next day, I sent a text to the other guy, something I never imagined I would do. I simply stated that I knew what had been going on, that I appreciated him acknowledging the feelings and ending the friendship, but that if I ever saw a personal, non work related text or call from him on her phone again, we'd be having a different kind of discussion in person. Perhaps it was more aggressive than I usually am, but I felt the need to draw a clear boundary. It wasn't a threat of violence or anything. I just wanted him to understand that I wasn't going to stand by and watch my marriage collapse because of some emotional entanglement he couldn't let go of. Since that night, my wife and I have been rebuilding, bit by bit. We've been together for 12 years, and this is the first major crisis we've faced that directly challenged the sanctity of our bond. It's not easy. I cycle through a storm of emotions: relief that it ended, anger that it started at all, hurt that she was willing to risk everything, and a cautious hope that we can move past it. She's gone out of her way to be more transparent. She'll show me her phone if I ask, and she encourages me to ask any questions I need to, no matter how uncomfortable. We've discussed counseling, possibly with our pastor, who's known us since our wedding day. We figure a neutral third party might help us communicate in a healthier way. Every now and then, I still feel a spike of anxiety when her phone buzzes. I wonder if it's him, if they've truly stuck to their agreement to cut ties, or if she's still harboring some lingering feelings. But she's been patient with me, reassuring me that I'm free to look at the messages anytime, that she's willing to do whatever it takes to restore my confidence. She also said she's fully aware trust isn't rebuilt overnight. I'll be honest, I never thought I'd be in this position. Throughout our relationship, people have seen us as this inseparable team, two shy, private souls who found each other in a crowded world. To see that fragile trust bent to its breaking point has been a humbling experience, but I also realize that marriage is a journey filled with trials, big and small. This one was big, no doubt, but I believe in the vows we made. For better or for worse isn't just a catchphrase, it's a promise that means we keep working, keep believing in each other, as long as there's a spark left to nurture. Her friend is apparently moving away soon with his wife, which brings a certain level of relief. I won't have to worry about them bumping into each other at work every day, and it lessens the temptation for either of them to slip back into old habits. Still, the real challenge is what it means for us, our marriage. Even if he moves across the country, the issue we faced remains. If there's a void or an emotional distance between us, it can be filled by someone else if we're not mindful. So we're working on that day by day. We've spent more time talking about our feelings in the last week than we had in the past year. It's exhausting, but also cathartic. Sometimes we laugh, recalling the early days of our relationship, or we hold each other and cry, acknowledging the betrayal that almost tore us apart. It's going to be a long road. I don't expect to wake up tomorrow and feel completely secure again. Doubt creeps in at odd moments. Sometimes I wonder if she's truly done, if her heart has truly let go of the rush she felt with him. Other times, I feel guilty for not trusting her immediately when she says she loves me. She asks me how she can make me feel more at ease, and I'm not always sure what to tell her. It's strange being the one who's both hurt and uncertain how to be comforted. Yet, for all the pain and uncertainty, there's a renewed sense of closeness forming between us. Ironically, this whole ordeal forced us to communicate more honestly than we have in years. We've examined parts of our marriage that we used to take for granted. She admitted that sometimes she felt bored or stagnant, like our routine had become predictable, and that's why this new friendship felt so exhilarating. I admitted that I sometimes drifted into my own world of work and hobbies without checking in on her emotional needs. Realizing these things doesn't justify what happened, but it gives us a blueprint for improving. She still mentions how embarrassed she is about the rumors at work. I can't entirely blame her coworkers for gossiping. Seeing two married people texting nonstop, grabbing lunch alone, and sending each other playful pictures would raise eyebrows anywhere. It's just painful to realize that our personal struggles spilled into the public realm. She says she feels judged whenever she walks into the store now, but I remind her that if their friendship is truly over, the rumors will fade with time. The important thing is that we learned from this. When I reflect on all of it, I keep coming back to the fact that neither she nor I wants to give up on our marriage. That's crucial. If one of us had already emotionally checked out, no amount of counseling or conversation would fix things. But I believe we both recognize how much we mean to each other. She's apologetic, I'm hopeful, and we're both determined not to let this define our future. We're talking about ways to bring more novelty back into our relationship, whether it's planning weekend trips, finding a mutual hobby, or setting aside time every day to just talk about our feelings and experiences. It might sound cliche, but I think we really did fall into that trap where we took each other for granted. I also hold on to the fact that she came clean, in her own way. Yes, it took some pushing. Yes, she was defensive at first, but the moment she realized what was happening, that she was crossing an emotional line, she and he decided to stop. That says something about her integrity. If they'd wanted to continue in secret, there would have been ways. I think on some level, she never wanted to truly cheat. She just got caught up in something that felt exciting. It's a messy business, emotions. People can stray without even realizing it until they're already in too deep. It doesn't excuse the betrayal, but it helps me see her as a flawed human being rather than a villain. In the end, I'm here, writing this long account of what happened, partly to unburden myself and partly to share a cautionary tale. Sometimes emotional affairs can sneak up on you under the guise of just friends, especially if both parties are in marriages that feel a bit stale or neglected. If you see signs, secretive texting, defensiveness, unusual excitement at receiving messages from someone else, don't ignore them. Talk it out, even if it's painful. If you love each other, you'll find a way through, but it might require a wake up call. For me, leaving that letter and spending a night in a hotel was my line in the sand. It was a risky move. She could have reacted in anger or turned to him for comfort, but it ended up being the catalyst that opened her eyes. We're not out of the woods yet, but I feel more hopeful than I have in a while. My wife and I have a counseling session scheduled with our pastor next week. We're both nervous and, frankly, a little embarrassed to air our dirty laundry to someone we respect so much. But I believe this is a crucial step in rebuilding the trust and emotional connection that got frayed. We'll take it one day at a time, focusing on honest communication and empathy. And at the end of the day, I still see in her the woman I fell in love with, the one who was reading a textbook on a bench at college, giving me a tentative smile. For anyone reading this, I hope my story resonates with you if you've ever struggled with boundaries in a marriage or a long term relationship. Love can be tested in ways you'd never expect. Emotional affairs might not leave physical evidence, but they can be just as devastating. Sometimes more so, because it's the emotional bond that truly underpins a marriage. If you sense something is off, trust your instincts, but also remember that open, vulnerable communication is key. Before you assume the worst, talk about it. And if your partner isn't responsive, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself and make a bold statement. Sometimes that's what it takes to snap someone out of denial. In my case, it looks like we're on a path to healing, and I thank every moment of clarity that led me to say, enough is enough. I can't just silently accept this. I learned that, contrary to what I used to believe, being non controlling doesn't mean you have to tolerate blatant disrespect. There's a balance between freedom and fidelity, between independence and intimacy, and it's crucial for both partners to respect that balance if a marriage is going to thrive. I'm hopeful we'll not only get through this, but come out stronger on the other side. We might have a long way to go, but for the first time in months, I feel like we're walking that path together.